The street was bustling that afternoon, the kind of busy where cars honked and people hurried by with bags in their hands. Sunlight bounced off the windows of the small shops, casting bright patches on the sidewalk. Among these shops was a small store that had been part of the neighborhood for years. It wasn't flashy or fancy, but people trusted it. It had a warm atmosphere, shelves neatly stacked, and the kind of friendly staff that made you feel welcome even if you had just walked in for a quick snack. The woman behind the counter knew most of her customers by name, and many of them stopped by every week just to chat for a few minutes. She had spent years building the business from scratch, pouring every hour she could into making it a place people wanted to visit. That day, like any other, she was at the counter, checking invoices and making sure the shelves were stocked. Her phone buzzed a few times with messages from suppliers, but she ignored them, focusing on the people walking in and out. The store had a rhythm, a kind of calm in the middle of the noisy city, and she liked it that way. She noticed everyone, even when she didn't interact with them. A man walked in that afternoon looking frustrated. There was a certain tension in the way he moved, his steps quick and harsh. He scanned the shelves as if searching for something, but his eyes kept darting to the counter. When he finally approached, it became clear he had an issue. It wasn't complicated. It was a small misunderstanding about a product he wanted, one the store didn't have. The woman greeted him calmly. Her voice was steady and polite, the kind of voice that made people feel heard even if they were upset. She explained that the item he wanted wasn't in stock today, but that they would get more soon. She even offered an alternative, showing him a similar product that many customers liked. But the man didn't want to hear reason. His frustration was too strong. His face was red and his hands trembled slightly, not from age but from anger. He didn't want alternatives. He wanted to be right. And when the woman continued to speak calmly, it seemed to him like she was dismissing his anger, which only made him more furious. Words were exchanged quickly, tension rising with every sentence. The woman remained composed, never raising her voice, never insulting him. She simply explained things clearly and kept a steady presence, as she always did with difficult customers. But the man wasn't used to being talked to this way. He expected fear. He expected someone to shrink back, to apologize profusely. Instead, he found calm confidence staring back at him, and that enraged him more. The situation escalated fast. He leaned over the counter, pointing his finger aggressively, and the woman took a small step back, keeping her eyes level with his. She did not flinch even when he raised his voice. People in the store stopped what they were doing. A few customers exchanged worried glances. Everyone could feel that something bad was about to happen. And then, in a split second, the man did something no one could have predicted. He slapped her across the face. It was a sharp, loud sound that echoed through the small store. Customers gasped. One person muttered, unable to believe what had just happened. The woman's hand flew to her cheek, but she did not scream. She did not shout. She simply looked at him, her eyes calm, steady, and full of a quiet strength that seemed almost impossible after what had just happened. The man, thinking he had won, stepped back, chest heaving, looking around to see if anyone had noticed his aggression. But he underestimated the people around him. A few customers immediately stood up, ready to intervene. One woman yelled at him to leave, while another grabbed her phone to record the incident. The store, which had always been a place of peace, had turned into a stage for a shocking act of violence. Even in that moment, the woman did not raise her voice. She addressed the man calmly, her tone firm but controlled. She told him to leave, explaining that violence was not acceptable. She did not call him names. She did not accuse him of being a terrible person. She simply stated the facts and set the boundaries. It was clear to everyone watching that she was in control, despite being the victim of a public assault. Outside, the city noise continued, but inside the store, time seemed to slow. People watched, frozen by the tension, as the man finally realized that his actions had consequences. His face changed, the initial rush of anger giving way to confusion. He looked around, noticing for the first time the other people in the store. Their expressions were not fear. They were disapproval. Some shook their heads, others whispered to each other, and the woman stood behind the counter, unshaken, composed, and dignified. It was in that moment that a few people outside the store began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They had seen someone filming and were curious. Some pulled out their phones and started recording. Social media, even in that small moment, was already beginning to notice. The woman's calm in the face of public aggression, Her courage and dignity was remarkable. People felt it immediately, even without knowing her story. The man, realizing that this was no longer a private confrontation, finally pushed the door open and left, muttering under his breath. He didn't know that the woman had witnessed hundreds of difficult situations in her life and handled each with grace. He didn't know that she had built her store from nothing, fought for every inch of her success, and had faced more challenges than he could imagine. He simply walked away, thinking that leaving the scene was enough to erase his mistake. The woman turned back to the customers, her expression softening slightly. She thanked them for their concern and reassured them that she was fine. She did not want them to be frightened or angry on her behalf. She returned to the counter, straightened the shelves, and continued her work as if nothing had happened. But inside, she was aware of the ripple this moment would create. She knew that stories like this often spread fast, and she also knew that her response could shape how others viewed the situation. People in the store began to talk quietly among themselves. Some expressed shock at the man's behavior. Others expressed admiration for how the woman handled herself. A few older customers commented that they had seen her manage far worse and still stay composed. It became clear that this small store, already respected in the neighborhood, had just added another reason for people to admire its owner. By the end of the day, news of the incident had already started to travel. A video clip, short but powerful, made its way onto social media. People praised the woman for staying calm, for refusing to let violence dictate her actions, and for showing what real courage looked like. The man, by contrast, became the focus of anger and disbelief. His actions, meant to assert dominance, instead highlighted his lack of control and poor judgment. The woman, unaware of how far the video would go, focused on her store and her customers. She greeted each person warmly, handled transactions efficiently, and even joked with a few regulars. She had learned a long time ago that letting anger control you only gives power to the wrong people, and today, she proved that once again. By the time evening came, the city outside the store settled into its usual rhythm. People went home, traffic slowed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky. Inside the store, the woman finished tidying up, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had faced something unexpected, something humiliating in public, but she had not let it break her. She had remained herself, true to her values, and that mattered more than anything. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment would mark the beginning of a story that would reach far beyond her neighborhood. People would see her courage, her dignity, and her strength. They would talk about her not because of the slap, but because of the way she handled it. And that, more than anything else, would define her. The video of the incident spread faster than anyone could have imagined. It started with a few social media posts from people who had been inside the store that day. Short clips showing the man's slap and the woman's calm reaction began circulating, and soon, dozens of people were sharing the same video, adding their own comments about the courage they saw. Some expressed shock at the violence, while others praised the woman for staying composed under such public humiliation. Within hours, the video had reached hundreds, then thousands, and eventually tens of thousands of views. People from across the city began commenting, sharing their own experiences of witnessing similar public aggression or expressing solidarity with the woman. The clip was shared not only on social media but also picked up by small local news outlets that were always looking for stories with strong emotional impact. It wasn't sensationalized, but the story was powerful on its own. An ordinary day disrupted by violence, met with extraordinary calm. Meanwhile, the man who had slapped her had gone home. Thinking the situation was over, he tried to convince himself that no one had seen him, that it would blow over quietly. But that hope vanished quickly as notifications flooded his phone. Videos, messages, and tags began appearing everywhere. Friends and colleagues reached out, some joking, some shocked. But the tone in most messages was clear. He had done something wrong, and now everyone knew it. The woman, unaware at first of how far the video had spread, continued her day as usual. She went about her work, greeted her customers, and managed her store as if nothing had happened. She didn't want to cause a scene, and she didn't want to let the man's aggression define her day. She believed that dignity and calm were stronger than anger and violence, and she lived by that principle. By the evening, however, her phone began to ring constantly. Notifications from social media poured in, and messages from friends and family started arriving. Many people had shared the video with her, telling her how proud they were, how impressed they were by the way she handled the situation. Some messages were supportive, others were curious. They asked how she felt, if she was okay, and whether she had reported the incident to the police. At first, she felt overwhelmed. The attention was not something she had sought, and the thought of being in the public eye made her anxious. But she quickly realized that this was not just about her. The story had resonated with people because it showed a truth many had experienced: the shock of encountering aggression in public and the power of handling it with calmness and self-respect. Meanwhile, the man was struggling. The comments on social media were harsh, calling out his behavior and questioning his character. He tried to defend himself in private messages to friends, but even they found it hard to justify what he had done. The video had made him the subject of ridicule and anger, and he felt the weight of public judgment more heavily than he expected. At the store, the woman noticed a change in the way customers interacted with her. People seemed more respectful, more attentive. Some mentioned they had seen the video, expressing admiration for how she had stayed calm. Regular customers stopped by not only to shop but also to show support, bringing small gifts or simply spending a few minutes talking and encouraging her. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of solidarity from her community, a reminder that she was not alone in facing challenges like this. She also began to think about the long-term impact of the incident. She realized that while it was shocking and upsetting, it could also be an opportunity to show others how to respond to public aggression, how to maintain dignity in the face of humiliation, and how to set boundaries without resorting to anger. She thought about writing a short note for social media, explaining her perspective and sharing what she had learned. But she hesitated. She wanted her actions to speak louder than her words. As the evening continued, local news outlets reached out. They wanted interviews, wanting to understand who she was and how she had handled the incident. She agreed, not for fame or attention, but because she wanted to use the platform to send a message. Violence is never acceptable, and dignity and calm can be more powerful than aggression. Her interview was measured, thoughtful, and genuine. She explained the situation clearly, acknowledging the fear she had felt but emphasizing that she refused to let it define her actions. The man, on the other hand, was becoming more aware of the consequences. Not only had he faced social backlash, but there were also potential legal implications. People started asking if he would be reported to the police, and some even speculated about fines or charges for public assault. The realization hit him hard. This was not a small mistake. This was an act that could follow him for a long time. Back at the store, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The woman continued running her business, but the incident had shifted something in her. She felt stronger, more aware of her own resilience, and more connected to her community. People came in to support her, sharing stories of how they had faced similar situations and how they had learned from her example. Her story had become more than just a video. It had become a lesson for many about courage, calm, and dignity. Over the next few days, the man tried to avoid attention, but it was impossible. He saw the video repeatedly online, read the comments, and felt the shame of public judgment. He began to reflect on his actions, realizing that his anger had caused him to act impulsively, and that he had humiliated himself far more than he had affected the woman. He had expected control, but instead he had lost it completely. The woman, meanwhile, continued her daily routine, but with a new awareness. She knew the world could be unpredictable, and people could act violently without warning. But she also knew that her response could set an example. She remained calm, professional, and composed, refusing to let fear dictate her life. Her story began to inspire others, and messages of support kept arriving from people she had never met. Even as the attention grew, she focused on the little things, greeting each customer with a smile, keeping her shelves organized, and maintaining the welcoming atmosphere that had made her store special. She understood that actions often speak louder than words, and she was determined to show that strength does not come from aggression, but from self-control and dignity. The man, watching from a distance, began to feel the weight of accountability. He realized that the woman's calm had contrasted sharply with his own impulsiveness. People admired her, respected her, and even shared her story widely. Meanwhile, he was being remembered for a moment of anger and rash behavior. The contrast was stark, and it forced him to reconsider not just that incident but the way he treated people in general. As days passed, the story continued to spread. Local news stations aired segments about the incident, focusing on the woman's courage and professionalism. Social media continued to buzz with hashtags praising her dignity and condemning public aggression. People in the neighborhood began visiting the store not only to shop, but also to show support and solidarity. The woman had unintentionally become a symbol of calm in the face of chaos, and the impact of her composure was felt far beyond the walls of her store. Throughout it all, she remained grounded. She did not let the attention change who she was or how she behaved. She welcomed customers warmly, answered questions patiently, and maintained her focus on her business. She understood that public recognition was fleeting, but personal integrity lasted a lifetime. Her response to the incident had set a standard, not just for the man who had slapped her, but for everyone who witnessed her strength. The man, in contrast, found himself increasingly isolated. His actions had consequences, and the public attention forced him to face them. He began to understand the real cost of impulsive aggression and how one rash act could ripple outward, affecting not just the victim, but his own reputation and peace of mind. It was a lesson he had never anticipated, but one he could not ignore. The woman's calmness and professionalism had turned a violent moment into a powerful message. People began sharing their own stories of encounters with aggression and how they had learned to respond without anger. Her example inspired conversations about respect, patience, and dignity. It reminded everyone watching that courage is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unwavering. By the end of the week, the neighborhood felt a subtle change. People spoke more kindly to one another, and those who had witnessed the incident continued to discuss it, sharing lessons learned. The woman's store became a place not just for shopping but for reflection, a symbol of calm strength in the face of unexpected challenges. The man, finally realizing the impact of his actions, knew he had to do something. He began to consider apologizing, reaching out to the woman, or even issuing a public statement. He could no longer hide from the consequences, and the contrast between his behavior and hers was impossible to ignore. He had lost control in a moment of anger, while she had maintained hers, earning respect, admiration, and support in ways he could not. The woman, meanwhile, continued her life as before, but with a quiet confidence. She had faced something deeply unsettling and had handled it with dignity. The support from her community reminded her that courage does not always have to be grandiose. Sometimes it is simply the choice to remain composed, to speak calmly, and to act with integrity. The incident had started as a shocking moment of violence but had turned into a story about strength, resilience, and the power of calm in public life. It showed people that dignity and composure are far more impactful than anger or aggression. And for the woman, it was a reminder that the way you respond to life's challenges can define not only how others see you, but also how you see yourself. After the incident and the wave of social media attention, things began to settle, but not in the way anyone expected. The woman continued to run her store, greeting customers, tidying shelves, and maintaining the welcoming atmosphere that had always made her place special. The video had circulated widely, but she didn't want it to define her day-to-day life. She was careful not to let the attention distract her from the work she had built over years. She focused on the people in her store, on the customers who depended on her, and on keeping her business running smoothly. The man, however, was in a very different place. He couldn't stop thinking about the incident. Every time he opened his phone, there was another post, another comment, another clip of that moment, showing him at his worst and the woman at her calmest. The realization weighed heavily on him. The woman he had slapped was not just any stranger. She had authority, dignity, and a presence that he had completely misjudged. His impulsive action had humiliated him publicly, while she had remained composed, commanding respect without raising her voice or retaliating. It wasn't long before the man began to hear whispers and comments around his own neighborhood and workplace. People who had seen the video were talking about it. Some were shocked. Some were laughing. Some were expressing admiration for her courage. He tried to explain the situation to his friends and co-workers, hoping to downplay it, but it was impossible. The video had gone beyond the original viewers. It had become a story, a lesson, a moment that people kept returning to. Meanwhile, the woman had started noticing something herself. Customers who came into the store began to speak more openly, telling her how much they admired the way she handled the situation. Some had even shared stories of their own, experiences where they had faced aggression or humiliation in public and hadn't known how to respond. Her calmness had inspired them. They didn't just see her as a store owner anymore. They saw her as a person who embodied strength and resilience. One morning, as she was arranging new stock on the shelves, a young man approached her. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the strap of his bag. He explained that he had seen the video and wanted to apologize for what had happened. He was not the man who had slapped her, but he represented a generation of people who were watching and learning from her example. He spoke about how he had witnessed bullying and aggression in public spaces and had felt powerless. Seeing her handle the situation had shown him that calmness and dignity could make a difference. The woman listened patiently, offering a kind smile. She thanked him for coming forward and for taking the time to reflect on what he had seen. It was moments like these that reminded her of why she had worked so hard to create a welcoming environment in her store. It wasn't just about selling goods. It was about creating a space where people could feel respected and safe, and where lessons about respect and dignity could take root naturally. The man who had slapped her, meanwhile, was struggling privately. He had begun to research the store and learned, to his shock, that the woman he had assaulted was the owner. She wasn't just an employee who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was the person who had built the business from the ground up. Every inch of that store represented her hard work, her persistence, and her dedication. The realization hit him hard. He had not only disrespected her personally, but he had also disrespected years of effort and sacrifice. He began replaying the incident in his mind repeatedly, analyzing every movement, every word, every glance. He realized how his actions had been impulsive and unnecessary, how they had escalated a minor misunderstanding into a moment of public humiliation for both himself and the woman. He thought about the onlookers, the customers, the neighbors who had witnessed it, and the people online who had shared the video. He understood that he had underestimated her, and that underestimation had made him act recklessly. The woman, on her side, remained focused on her work, but she began to notice the ripple effects of what had happened. More people were visiting her store, some to shop, others to speak to her in person. Many told her that her calmness in the face of violence had changed how they thought about handling conflict. Parents brought their children, explaining that they wanted them to see a real example of courage and dignity. Students stopped by to ask how they could learn to stay composed in difficult situations. Even strangers who had never been to her store sent messages of support, expressing admiration and gratitude. The man, feeling the weight of his actions, began to take steps to make amends. He wasn't sure how to do it at first. He considered sending a message through social media, but he feared it would come across as insincere. He debated calling the store, but he worried that speaking to her directly might intimidate or upset her further. Eventually, he realized that he had to acknowledge her authority, her ownership, and her dignity. He drafted a message, carefully choosing words that conveyed sincere regret, and sent it, hoping that she could see that he understood the gravity of what he had done. When she received the message, she read it slowly. She could sense the remorse in his words, the awkwardness, and the honesty. She didn't respond immediately. She took time to consider the situation, remembering the anger he had shown, the public humiliation, and the fear she had felt in that moment. But she also considered the larger lesson. Sometimes, people make mistakes out of impulsiveness, not malice, and acknowledging those mistakes could be a step toward accountability and growth. In the days that followed, the man's message sparked conversations among his friends and family. They discussed the incident in detail, analyzing his behavior and the woman's response. Many expressed surprise at her composure, noting that it was not easy to remain calm when publicly assaulted. They talked about the importance of respect, empathy, and self-control, and the man began to realize that these were lessons he needed to internalize, not just acknowledge superficially. The woman, meanwhile, continued her daily routine with quiet determination. She handled customers, managed deliveries, and kept the store clean and organized. But beneath the surface, she felt a sense of fulfillment. She had turned a difficult, humiliating moment into an example for her community. Her actions had taught lessons about calmness, resilience, and dignity that no amount of anger or aggression could ever erase. As more people became aware of her story, Journalists and social media influencers reached out to her for interviews. She agreed, not for fame, but to emphasize the importance of handling conflict with composure and respect. She shared her thoughts openly, explaining that her goal was to inspire people to choose calmness over aggression, understanding over impulsiveness. Her words were simple, heartfelt, and resonated with everyone who heard them. The man continued to struggle privately, but he also began to reflect deeply. He thought about how quickly anger had taken control, how easily he had misjudged the situation, and how differently the outcome could have been if he had paused and thought before acting. He realized that the slap was not just a momentary lapse. It was a reflection of deeper issues he needed to address in himself, a lesson he could no longer ignore. Meanwhile, the store became a place of reflection and learning. Customers and neighbors often stopped by to discuss the incident, to share stories, and to talk about how they could respond differently in challenging situations. The woman, who had simply continued her work, had become an unintentional mentor, showing that courage and dignity were accessible to anyone willing to practice them. Through all this, the man finally made the decision to meet the woman in person. He approached the store one quiet afternoon, nervous but determined. He entered and saw her behind the counter, arranging products with the same calm and steady presence he had witnessed before. His hands shook slightly as he stepped forward, but he forced himself to speak, acknowledging his mistake and expressing sincere regret. The woman listened carefully. She didn't interrupt or respond immediately. She allowed him to speak, to express the full weight of his remorse. After he finished, she spoke softly, emphasizing the importance of accountability and the impact of his actions. She did not belittle him, but she made it clear that respect and self-control were not optional. The conversation was difficult, but it was honest. The man left the store with a new understanding of his own behavior, humbled by the woman's strength and dignity. He had expected anger, resistance, or even revenge, but instead he found calm, clarity, and a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. In the days that followed, life began to return to a new normal. The woman continued running her store, focused on her work, her customers, and her community. The incident, while shocking, had become a source of teaching and reflection for many. People continued to share her story not because of the slap, but because of the way she handled it, showing that true strength often lies in restraint, patience, and dignity. And while the man would always remember that day, it was the woman's response that lingered in the minds of everyone who witnessed or heard about it. Her calm, composed, and dignified handling of public aggression had transformed a moment of humiliation into a lasting lesson about courage, respect, and human strength. After the man had met the woman and expressed his remorse, he thought that might be the end of the story, that he could put the incident behind him. But life has a way of reminding people that actions have consequences, no matter how much one wishes they could disappear. Within days, the video continued to circulate online, and the story caught the attention of local authorities. People who had witnessed the incident came forward giving statements and providing details. The man realized quickly that apologizing alone wouldn't erase the weight of what he had done. The woman, meanwhile, continued her routine at the store, focused on her customers and her business. But she was aware that the situation had shifted beyond her control. She had already received support from neighbors, friends, and loyal customers, but now there was a larger audience watching. The attention could have been overwhelming, but she approached it with the same calm she had shown in the store. She responded to inquiries and interviews carefully, emphasizing respect, dignity, and the importance of accountability. The man began to experience the consequences firsthand. The authorities reached out and he was asked to provide a formal statement. The reality of facing legal repercussions settled on him like a heavy weight. He realized that what had started as a brief moment of anger now had serious implications. He had to acknowledge not only the assault itself, but the impact it had on the woman and the people who had witnessed it. At the same time, the community rallied around the woman. Local residents began visiting her store in larger numbers, offering support and encouragement. They brought small tokens of appreciation, shared stories about how the incident had inspired them, and spoke openly about the respect they had developed for her. The woman accepted their gestures gracefully, always redirecting the focus to the lessons of calmness, dignity, and resilience. She refused to let the attention become about fame or recognition. Instead, she used it to show that strength often comes quietly, in the way one responds to adversity. The man's personal and professional life began to feel the ripple effects. People who knew him started asking questions, and those who had seen the video discussed it openly. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with his actions. Colleagues were judgmental, and his reputation suffered in ways he had not anticipated. It was no longer just about the slap. It was about how one impulsive act could redefine how people viewed him. Each day became a lesson in humility, and he began to reflect deeply on his behavior and character. In the store, life continued, but with subtle changes. The woman noticed that new customers came in regularly, some drawn by curiosity, others by admiration for her courage. Many expressed how inspired they were by the way she had handled the incident. She listened carefully to their stories, encouraging them to approach conflict with patience and calm. Her store had always been a place of warmth and community, but now it had also become a place of learning and reflection. Meanwhile, the man struggled with his own feelings of shame and regret. He replayed the incident repeatedly in his mind, thinking about how different things could have been if he had paused, spoken calmly, or walked away. He understood that his impulsiveness had caused real harm, not just to the woman but also to his own sense of self. He began considering ways to make amends beyond just apologies, thinking about restitution and learning how to manage anger responsibly. The authorities contacted the woman for her statement regarding the incident. She recounted the events clearly and calmly, emphasizing the facts without exaggeration or personal attacks. She made it clear that while she was the victim, she had not sought revenge or escalation. She had acted with composure, showing that self-control and dignity are powerful responses to aggression. Her testimony was professional, measured, and respectful, which further impressed both the authorities and the wider community. The man was required to attend a mediation session, designed to confront the consequences of his actions and to encourage understanding and accountability. During the session, he faced the reality of how his actions had affected the woman, the witnesses, and his own reputation. The woman participated, not to humiliate him, but to explain the impact and to encourage reflection. Her presence reminded him that accountability was not about punishment alone. It was about understanding, growth, and change. The man left the mediation feeling a mix of relief and humility. He had confronted his mistakes, heard firsthand the impact of his actions, and recognized that true accountability required more than words. He began exploring ways to correct his behavior, understanding that the lessons from this incident could shape him into a better, more thoughtful person. Back at the store, the woman continued to see the ripple effects of her calm response. News outlets interviewed customers who shared how inspired they were by her composure. People discussed how witnessing her strength had changed the way they thought about conflict, patience, and public behavior. Some visitors explained that they had previously reacted impulsively in stressful situations, but now wanted to emulate her calmness and restraint. Her influence spread quietly but powerfully. The man, reflecting on all of this, realized the broader lesson. It wasn't just about him or the slap. It was about respect, humility, and understanding human dignity. He began to see how quickly anger can cloud judgment, how public humiliation can spiral, and how personal growth requires confronting uncomfortable truths. He had hoped to avoid consequences, but now he understood that facing them was necessary for any chance at redemption. In the community, people began talking about the incident, not as a shocking act of violence, but as an example of how courage and dignity can transform a moment of conflict. Parents discussed it with children. Teachers mentioned it in lessons about behavior and respect, and neighbors shared it as a cautionary tale. The woman's calmness had turned a negative situation into a teaching moment, creating an impact far beyond the store walls. As time went on, the man began taking small steps to demonstrate genuine accountability. He attended workshops on anger management, sought advice from counselors, and reflected daily on how to respond differently in the future. Each day was a reminder that impulsive actions have long-lasting consequences, but also that change and growth were possible if he approached them with honesty and humility. The woman continued her daily routine, maintaining her store and interacting with her customers. She remained a symbol of strength, showing that resilience is often quiet, steady, and dignified. Her calm response had not only prevented further escalation, but it also inspired an entire community to consider how they handle conflict and aggression. Over time, the man's respect for her deepened. He realized that the slap had not weakened her, but had only highlighted her composure and dignity. He began sharing his own story of reflection, explaining how he had learned to manage anger and understand the consequences of his actions. His journey of accountability became a private lesson in humility, a reminder that respect and understanding are far more valuable than aggression and impulsiveness. Meanwhile, the woman's store continued to thrive. Customers returned regularly, drawn not just by the products but by the warmth, respect, and example she represented. People appreciated her not only for her professionalism, but for her ability to turn a difficult and public moment into a story of courage and composure. Her influence extended quietly into the community, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who visited or heard her story. The man, having gone through a period of reflection, accountability, and learning, began to understand the true meaning of respect. He realized that one moment of aggression could define a person in the eyes of the world, but that confronting mistakes honestly and seeking growth could begin to restore integrity and self-respect. He carried the lesson with him, knowing that it would shape his interactions with others for years to come. For the woman, life continued as usual, but with a deeper awareness of her own strength and influence. She understood that calmness, dignity, and professionalism could create lasting change, even in the face of public aggression. The support from her community, the recognition from those who witnessed her composure, and the lessons learned by the man all reinforced her belief in the power of resilience and human strength. By the end of this period, the incident had transformed from a shocking act of violence into a story of growth, accountability, and community. The man had faced consequences and begun the work of self-reflection. The woman had maintained her dignity and turned a negative moment into a source of inspiration. The community had witnessed a lesson in courage and calm, realizing that true strength often comes in the way one responds to adversity, not in the act of aggression itself. Life in the neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact of the incident lingered in subtle ways. The woman continued running her store with the same care, attention, and warmth as before, but now, people watched her not just as a business owner, but as someone who had faced public aggression and responded with dignity. Her calmness had left an impression that was visible in the way customers interacted with her, in the way neighbors talked about her, and in the quiet respect that now filled her store. The man who had slapped her had gone through weeks of reflection, legal accountability, and personal growth. He had faced the consequences of his actions, learned the lessons of humility, and understood the magnitude of the harm he had caused. But the final part of his journey was more personal, more internal. It was about accepting responsibility fully, not just externally through apologies or restitution, but within himself. One afternoon, he decided to return to the store, not as someone seeking forgiveness superficially, but as someone ready to face the woman and the reality of what he had done. He walked slowly, feeling nervous, aware that this moment would mark a turning point. When he entered, the familiar bell over the door rang, and she looked up from her work, acknowledging him with the same calm composure she had shown that day of the incident. He took a deep breath and spoke honestly. He acknowledged his mistake fully, without excuses, explaining that he had acted impulsively, without thinking about the consequences. He spoke about how the incident had changed him, how he had reflected on his behavior, and how he had worked to understand the lessons he needed to learn. The words came carefully, weighed with sincerity, and for the first time he truly felt the weight of accountability. The woman listened, her expression steady, her eyes showing understanding but not indulgence. She allowed him to speak, letting him take responsibility for his actions, but she also spoke clearly about the impact of what he had done. She explained that while she had been calm and composed, the incident had been shocking and hurtful. Her response had not been a sign of weakness, but a conscious choice to remain in control and to prevent escalation. Their conversation lasted longer than expected, touching on personal responsibility, respect, and the ways in which anger can cloud judgment. The man began to understand that true growth was not just about saying sorry or following legal requirements. It was about changing behavior, learning empathy, and considering the consequences of actions before reacting. He felt a sense of relief, not because he was forgiven immediately, but because he had confronted the truth fully. Meanwhile, the woman continued her work in the store, interacting with customers, managing stock, and maintaining the welcoming atmosphere that had always defined her business. Her calmness was contagious, and people noticed it. Customers commented on how peaceful the store felt, how professional and composed she was, and how inspiring her behavior had been. Her strength had become part of the community's identity, a lesson in resilience and dignity that people would remember for years. Word of the man's accountability and reflection began to circulate. Some neighbors who had seen the incident were surprised at the sincerity of his actions, but many acknowledged that his willingness to face the consequences was a positive step. The woman's influence was evident in how he approached this moment with humility and honesty. It was a reminder that courage and dignity can have ripple effects, even on those who initially acted wrongly. Over the following weeks, the community continued to show support for the woman. People visited the store not just to shop, but to express gratitude for the example she had set. Parents brought children, explaining that they wanted them to witness real courage. Neighbors discussed the incident as a teaching moment, emphasizing how composure and restraint can prevent escalation and inspire respect. The store became more than just a place to buy goods. It became a symbol of calm strength and human dignity. The man, reflecting further, realized that the incident had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had been forced to confront his impulsiveness, his anger, and the consequences of acting without thought. He understood that growth required ongoing effort, not a single act of apology. He began applying these lessons in his daily life, interacting with others more thoughtfully, listening more carefully, and thinking before reacting. The story of that day became a constant reminder of the importance of respect, patience, and self-control. The woman, while maintaining her daily routine, also noticed the impact her calmness had on others. Messages of support, gratitude, and admiration continued to arrive from people who had witnessed the incident or seen the video online. Some spoke about how they had learned to respond differently to conflict, inspired by the way she had handled herself. Others shared stories of their own experiences with aggression and how they hoped to emulate her composure. She realized that her actions had created a ripple effect far beyond her expectations. As the man and the woman continued their separate paths, the story of the incident became a lesson for the broader community. Schools discussed it in character education programs, community groups used it to teach conflict resolution, and neighbors shared it as a reminder of the power of dignity and patience. The man's growth and the woman's composure together became a narrative about accountability, respect, and resilience. One afternoon, the man returned to the store, this time to express gratitude rather than guilt. He thanked the woman for the example she had set, and for the way she had helped him understand the consequences of his actions. He acknowledged that the lessons he had learned would stay with him for the rest of his life. The woman listened, offering a calm and encouraging smile. She reminded him that growth comes from reflection and continued effort, and that he had taken important steps by facing the situation honestly. Life in the store gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. Customers came and went. Deliveries were managed, and the shelves were kept neat and orderly. But beneath the ordinary routine, the store had become a symbol of something deeper. It represented resilience, courage, and the power of calm in the face of conflict. People remembered that day not for the aggression, but for how it was handled and the lessons it left behind. The man, carrying the lessons of that incident, continued to reflect on his actions and behavior. He understood that true respect and accountability were ongoing responsibilities, not one-time gestures. He thought about the ripple effects of impulsive behavior and how quickly one action could change how others viewed him. Each day he reminded himself of the woman's composure and the impact it had on everyone around her. Meanwhile, the woman's influence continued quietly but powerfully. People who visited her store took her example into their own lives, practicing calmness, patience, and respect in situations of conflict. Stories of the incident were shared repeatedly, not as tales of aggression but as lessons in dignity, composure, and human strength. The ripple effect grew, touching people far beyond the neighborhood, inspiring them to act with integrity and self-control in challenging situations. The man and the woman eventually reached a place of mutual respect. He understood the magnitude of his mistake, and she recognized the sincerity of his growth. Their paths had crossed in a difficult moment, but that moment had become a catalyst for learning, reflection, and change. He had faced the consequences, accepted accountability, and begun a journey of personal growth. She had maintained her dignity, inspired a community, and turned a public humiliation into a story of resilience. In the end, the story left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it or heard about it. It was no longer just a story of a public assault. It was a story about human strength, the power of composure, and the lessons that can come from facing mistakes honestly. The woman's calm response and the man's journey toward accountability created a narrative that transcended the incident itself, teaching lessons that would remain relevant for years to come. The neighborhood returned to its rhythm. The store continued to operate and life went on. But the incident and the way it was handled had changed something quietly but profoundly. It reminded people that anger and aggression are fleeting, but dignity, accountability, and composure leave lasting marks. It showed that mistakes, when confronted honestly, can lead to growth and understanding. And most importantly, it proved that one person's calm and composed response can inspire change, not just in those immediately involved, but in an entire community. The woman continued her life, her store, and her work, always aware of the lessons embedded in that day. The man, having faced the full weight of his actions, carried the lessons of accountability and reflection into his own life. The community watched, learned, and grew, taking inspiration from how dignity and courage can shine through even the darkest, most unexpected moments. The story ended not with anger or violence, but with understanding, respect, and the quiet power of human resilience. And in that way, what had begun as a shocking, public act of aggression became a lasting story of human strength, accountability, and the importance of responding to life's challenges with patience, calm, and integrity.